Hello and welcome back to my series, Reading Tintin, A Personal View. This is episode 8, and the volume that we're going to look at today is The Black Island, which was the 7th of the adventures. And like the early adventures, this one was done first in black and white, serialized, and then collected into a black and white book. And then later it was redone in color. And this particular volume of the Tintin Adventures is unique in that it actually had 3 different versions that it went through. So there was the original black and white collected into book form, and as I said, the color version of that. But then it was completely redrawn again many years later, and that later version is the one that we have. When you go to buy it these days, that's the one that you'll get. So we're going to take a look at that. And before we do so, I'd just like to say that if you're watching these videos and you like Tintin and you enjoy looking at them with me in this manner, please consider hitting the like button or even subscribing to my YouTube channel. I have videos on other stuff as well. I'm a cartoonist myself, and I've had one graphic novel published by First Second, Lucy in the Sky. I got a second one coming out in the near future. It's just going through the finishing touches on it. That one's called Rhiannon. And if you check out my Patreon page that I have with my wife, Kiara Brinkman, you'll find videos and artwork and anything that we're currently working on, we put up there for you to see. And if you are so kind as to become a paying member, you'll get previews of videos, exclusive video content, and PDFs of finished artwork as I finish them and put them up there. So please consider visiting our Patreon site and consider becoming a member. And now let's take a look at The Black Island. So I've got the French edition of it, published by Casterman, and my English language edition, which is published here in the States by, well, it was Atlantic Little Brown. It's now Little Brown, I think. And I have in this Archives Hergé. I bought this a long time ago. I got this back when you before the internet, before you bought things on the internet, you had to buy things through mail order. And I remember ordering this. I had to send away for a catalog, first of all. It was a catalog to a place that sold kind of hard to find comics and books about comics. And I remember seeing these various volumes of this series, the Archives Hergé. And I just took a chance on it and bought one of them. And these hardcover volumes, they publish the original black and white versions of the stories, of the early stories that were done in black and white, serialized in black and white. And you can see the original format, the 3 sort of tier format. Hergé later went to a 4-tier format when he did the color versions, and he had to really rework a lot of the panels, reformat the pages. But this was a really nice early chance for me to see what the original versions of these stories were like. And this particular volume here has the Black Island, King Ottokar's scepter, and the crab with the golden claws in it. And we see here that the Black Island is from 1937. when it was redone in color, it was 1943, I believe, was the color version. And then, like I said, the whole thing was redrawn, and that took place in 1966. And the reason for that was it hadn't been released in Britain in an English language version yet. And they were preparing to do so, but the British publisher, which I believe was Methuen, was the British publisher of these books, wanted Hergé to update it. They actually gave him a list of things that they thought were out of date in his depiction of the British Isles. I gave him a whole list of things that they wanted redone in the book if an English language version were to come out. And so he took on the task of doing so, and he sent two of his assistants at the time, Bob Damore, which was one of his main collaborators working at his the studios Hergé, and another one of his assistants, Roger Leloup, who specialized in airplanes. And we'll see in here that so far as having a lot of great planes, trains, and automobiles, the Black Island has all of those, and they're really, really nicely done. And that's thanks to Roger Leloup. And I have another comic that he went on to do, the series called Yoko Tsuno. This is the only volume of the series that I have. There are others of them. But just looking through it, you can really see the nice job that he does in backgrounds and in vehicles. Let me see if I can find a example of some video. These really nice cars and so forth. The figures, however, they sort of lack the vitality that Hergé was able to really put into his characters. But you know, everything else is really nicely drawn, and his influence is very evident in this volume in particular. So, okay, enough blathering on about that. Let's take a look. So this book is one that I read early on when I was a kid. Before I had any of these myself, I used to visit my cousins in Canada, and they had kids in Canada had access to the Tintin books. Methuen also published in Canada, and and so they had these books, and they knew about them. And when I went up to visit my cousins, this was my first exposure to them, and I would read them. And this is one of the ones that they had up there. And I remember being very, very impressed with this particular volume because of the high standard of the artwork. And it's because it was redrawn in 1966, and the studio was kind of at the height of its artistry, its drawing. That said, one criticism of this book is that the artwork is kind of overdone. It is so good, but the story just does not match the artwork in its effectiveness. So it sort of leaves you feeling that it's a lot of show, but not a lot of substance underneath. It's not like, for instance, the calculus affair. People often point to that as being sort of the high point of these books, where both the story and the artwork are just, you know, perfectly match each other. It just seems like the artwork is it's a little bit too overdone. It's a little bit too perfect. It's a little too beautiful. And that may be so, but if you're just looking at it, it's really a delight for the eyes. So we start here. Tintin is walking along, and he finds a plane. Seems to be in trouble, and he hurries over to see if he can help out. And one of the men from the plane turns around and shoots him, and they appear to leave him for dead. Of course, he's not dead. He wakes up in the hospital, And here we have Thompson and Thompson making their appearance, and their first stumble, which they're obligated to do in each of these. But this one, you don't see it, you just hear the sound effects, and you know that they've fallen on their face. They're walking out into the hallway, right about ready to slip on a wet floor. So, kind of typical. So right off the bat, we've got some nice airplane drawings, and then a nice train, a nice sort of electric train. Bob Damour and Roger Leloup really, they went over there to do research, and they sketched everything that they could find, locations, vehicles, everything. They took meticulous notes and sketches to make sure that they got everything down perfectly. And I remember reading this and feeling like, you know, I was actually there in the place. And the inside of this train is really, really nicely done. And of course, there's Thompson and Thompson. First, the suitcases fall on them, and they're supposed to be watching Tintin, who they've captured now. They think he's involved with the villains, and first chance he gets, he steals their keys and escapes. And they wake up. He pulls the brake on the train. Suitcases fall on their heads, and they don't realize that they're handcuffed together. And so as they walk off, There's another example of Tintin coming up with a disguise out of nowhere. Some more great cars. These are really nicely done. And now we're on the cross-channel ferry heading for England. So, so this is kind of one of these strange things about the Tintin books. As I said in previous episodes, reading the English language versions of these as a kid, I was left with the impression that Tintin was English and that the stories were set in England. And this is reinforced by little clues and place names that are changed to give them more English-sounding names in the English translation. They're different from the French version. And we'll see when we get to Secret of the Unicorn. It really is made explicit that we're made to think that these stories are set in England rather than in Belgium. But the thing that creates some confusion with that is that in this story, Tintin travels to England. So if he's already in England, how could he be taking the cross-channel ferry to England? And I often wondered about this inconsistency. You know, it wouldn't be a big deal if we assumed that he lived in Brussels, which is his actual hometown. But if we're to follow this logic is put forward by the English language versions that he lives in England, then this doesn't make sense. But there is a little clue in the in the dialogue here, where the Thompsons are first visiting Tintin in the hospital, and they're telling him that they're investigating this plane crash. They're investigating a plane crash, and they're wondering if it's the same plane that he encountered before he got shot. And they get a phone call, and as they're about ready to leave, one of them tells Tintin, "We're going back to England. An unregistered plane crashed last night near a place called Eastdown in Sussex." So if they're going back to England, maybe that's meant to suggest to us that, I don't know, maybe Tintin was on holiday in Europe, and they actually all are located, their home bases in England. So I don't know. It's just kind of a strange thing for them to say, "We're going back to England," unless that's what it's meant to make us think. car is so nicely done. And now we're on the cliffs of Dover again. You know, Bob Damore must have been sketching out there. All these locations are all so realistic. And here we have the plane crash. Even the crashed plane looks great. And now we have our first view of the new villain, Dr. Mueller, who pops up again in future Tintin adventures, but this is his first appearance. So this book was originally done in the late 30s. And if you understand what was going on in Europe in the late 30s, and the idea that this book is about counterfeiters in England trying to undermine the British economy by pumping counterfeit money into it, it kind of makes sense when you think about what was going on with the Nazis right before World War II, and all their aggression towards neighboring countries, and the menace that they posed to a lot of the European democracies at the time. And the fact that Mueller is obviously a German character. He sort of represents a German element inside England who is working to undermine the economy with his counterfeit operation. So one of the things that they redid for the color version is Mueller's house, and they really went and did their research and gave his house a nice Jacobean sort of style of architecture. It's got this timber frame look, even the windows, the furnishings, everything is so nicely researched and done. They also had to update the uniforms of the fire brigade to make them a little bit more accurate for British readers. Another great vehicle there, the fire truck. So great. And here Tintin is figuring out the counterfeiters' scheme using planes to make their drops. He's figured out a torn up note, which are instructions for the pilot where to make the drop. And the rest of the story is pretty much just about the villains trying to prevent Tintin from exposing their operation. So one chase after another, again, more great vehicles. This little camper and the car that's pulling it. And then the town with the train, another train. This is, for anyone who's a big planes, trains, and automobile fan, this is the volume for that. This is a great sequence where Tintin is chasing the forgers through the dining car, and as he's running through, he bumps a waiter who's serving a chicken on a plate, and the platter. As Tintin's going past, the platter splats on the head of another diner. The chicken, which was on the platter, falls down right into Snowy's jaws. Snowy runs off with the whole chicken. In the original version, we see here that Tintin has ash or soot all over his face and his clothes from having gone through this tunnel. In the original version, it looked a lot more like he was in blackface, and so I wonder if that was toned down because of the racist element there. And here's something here that they updated for this version. By the time this one came out, I believe it's been established that Loch Lomond whiskey is sort of the house brand of whiskey for the Tintin stories. That's the whiskey that Captain Haddock prefers, and so here they are on a tanker car of Loch Lomond whiskey. And we see Snowy's penchant for alcohol coming up. Another great train drawing there. So Snowy feels a drop of the whiskey leaking out of the tanker, and he says, golly, that's not water, but it's got a certain something all the same. Aha, there must be a link. And as Tintin's cleaning himself up, Snowy is rolling around drunk. And when the train stops, Tintin's calling for Snowy, and he finds him wobbling along the track, completely inebriated. Good heavens, he's tight. He says, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. You're worse than a mongrel from the gutter. Now pull yourself together and pick up the scent. We're chasing gangsters, remember? And he looks back and he says, it's not fair. Two of you picking on a poor little dog. So Snowy appears to take off, picking up the scent. Tintin's excited. He never really lets me down. And he goes around a corner and he finds that Snowy has just found another barrel of the whiskey. But no sooner does he start scolding Snowy when he's pulled in by the hook of a cane, and we wonder who that could be. So the Thompsons, much like Cigars of the Pharaoh, are after Tintin throughout this whole story, thinking that he's one of the villains. They able to change their allegiance, their friendship to Tintin very easily. They pull him into the pub there, and the forgers themselves happen to be sitting there, and they rush out. And not before one of the Thompsons prevents him from giving chase. So this leads us to one of my favorite sequences in the book, and possibly one of my favorite Thompson and Thompson gag sequences ever. So they go to this flying club, this airfield, and right off they're buzzed by an airplane that has the villains escaping from them. By the way, more great airplane drawings here. And the Thompsons' hats are blown off. This is another recurring gag. They're always having their hats blown off their head. And so they go to get their hats, and they find that Tintin has now escaped from them. He flies off. And so they run to commandeer their own airplane. And they get a guy that they see working on an airplane over here, and they tell him that they're police and that they're commandeering the plane and they need him to fly it, and he begins arguing with them. They don't give him a chance to speak. They yell at him, police, you understand? Full throttle, pilot. And so they take off. And as they're going, they tell the pilot, you can cut out the aerobatics. And it's only then that the pilot is able to get in a few words and say, I'm sorry, sir, I'm doing my best. It's the first time I've flown. I'm just a mechanic. So we cut to Tintin's plane, and he's in there with the pilot of the plane, and they have to crash because of fog, visibility, bad visibility. And this is how they get to Scotland, which is sort of the last act of the story. So they're given refuge by a Scotsman, and Tintin makes his way down to the town of Kiltuck the next day, and he's inquiring about an air crash, a plane crash from the landlord of the pub. And while he's talking an old guy in the corner begins telling him about the beast of the Black Island. And of course this intrigues Tintin, and so he's determined to go out to the Black Island. He tries to hire a boat. Nobody will go out to the Black Island, so he ends up having to buy the boat from one of the fishermen, and off he goes. Some really nice drawings of Tintin approaching the island, and the island itself makes you think that they must have gone to some location and sketched this. The interior of the castle. He's up in the tower of the castle, and he hears a thumping sound coming up, and out of the doorway comes a gorilla, which is the legendary beast of the Black Island. And it's interesting to keep in mind that this came out around the time of, in the 30s, around the time of the movie King Kong, the original movie, and that was a very, very popular movie. And so, you know, giant gorillas were sort of in the zeitgeist. Not a very realistic gorilla, but I kind of like how he's drawn. And he proves very fearsome. I like this little detail here where Tintin has run off, and his hat, his bonnet flies off his head. The gorilla grabs it, and as the gorilla comes down, he's got it on his head. A little detail like that I love. Tintin tries to throw a rock at him. Doesn't faze him. The gorilla picks up a giant brick and begins to raises it up as if to throw it. Like these cliffhanger endings, you get the feel of the original, the way it appeared originally as a strip, where every installment would end on a cliffhanger. You'd wonder what's going to happen next. And we find out it goes through the door. Tintin escapes through the door, but Snowy is caught by the gorilla, and nice close-up of Snowy facing the gorilla, but then Snowy barks, and we see that the gorilla is terrified by Snowy. Later on, Tintin is trapped in a cave. One of the counterfeiters has taken the gorilla out to try to hunt down Tintin, and they've caught him in this cave, which is going to fill up as the tide rises. He manages to find his way through a tunnel, which leads to underneath the castle, where the forgers have their counterfeiting equipment all set up. And then here we have some back and forth where Tintin has them, and then they escape. And it looks as if the villain is pleading for his life, but he pulls a fast one on Tintin, and it looks like he has Tintin, but Tintin gives him a kick, and then the gorilla comes down. He shoots his gun to scare the gorilla, but a piece of masonry falls on his head. And now it looks like the gorilla has got Tintin, but is scared away with Snowy barking. And then another gag. He says, "Silly, isn't it? Imagine a great big animal like that scared out of his wits by a tiny little," and then he's frightened by a spider and runs off. Tintin thinks he's hearing people talking in another room. He runs in, hands up that it's just a television. And here we come back to the Thompsons. We see that the plane that the Thompsons commandeered has accidentally entered into an air stunt flying competition. And as Tintin is watching them on the television, they're frantically pleading with the mechanic to land the plane, and the mechanic is telling them, I don't know how, I'm just a mechanic. And they go through some of the wildest stunts, one of them turning a somersault with one of the Thompsons falling out of the plane and then getting caught again. Finally, a crash landing, and of course they win the championship for their stunts. The interior of this office I always thought was really nicely drawn as well. Another example where they really paid attention to some detail. The decor is very modern looking, kind of a modernist style. And Tintin manages to get on a radio and to radio the police. And so here come Thompson and Thompson on a police boat. And we have a final showdown with the villains. Nice little callback sequence here where he's throwing masonry down the spiral staircase of the tower, and they all come falling out together. Kind of very Keystone Cop sort of stunt there, kind of humor. And then the same thing happens with the gorilla, who gets frightened by Snowy once more. He comes falling down on top of them. Of course, the police boat lands and the Thompsons fall right into the water, one after the other, losing their hats in the process. And then as they finally get up there, Tintin slips on a piece of masonry and comes falling down on top of them. So, nice little triplet. And one more great airplane for good measure. They find the hangar where the counterfeiters keep their plane. Back on land, the reporters are all crowding around to to hear Tintin's report about how he caught the counterfeiters. And I love these two panels here. He's coming up to see this crowd of reporters, and all of a sudden they scatter in fright. He says, "Very odd. Did I say something wrong?" And we see behind him the gorilla has come up. And of course, Tintin and the gorilla are now best of friends, as he has helped mend the gorilla's broken arm. This panel here features a reporter. I'll have to look up his name. I can't remember his name now, but he appears later in some of the Tintin stories. I believe he's in the Castafiore Emerald, and maybe the Picaros. I'll have to check and see. But he appears here. He doesn't have a speaking part. He's just sort of dropped in the background. And I think this is because it was redrawn in '66, and characters might have been familiar with him at that point. And finally, we get a newspaper spread, which Hergé likes to do to sort of wrap up the story and give the final exposition on how the story ends. And we end with one last airplane, a nice airliner, with the Thompsons having their hats blown off. And that is a classic ending to The Black Island.